And the recording has started.
Excellent. Do you want to kick us off, Savannah?
You can go ahead and kick us off, and I'll kick off the presentation.
Perfect. Sounds great. Well, welcome everybody to today's Doug Meetup. I am very excited to be here and kick things off with you today. Thank you, Savannah, for being our lovely host. Savannah will kick off our session today and our speaker in just a little bit. But as we get started, I wanted to just do a quick introduction to myself as well as who Dynamics User Group is if you're not familiar. So I am Liz Hallen. I am one of the team members here at Dynamics User Group, lovingly referred to as Doug. We are a community of 45,000 community members and growing across the globe. We focus on all of the Dynamics 365, Dynamics GP, and Power Platform products. And really our core mission and purpose here is to offer as much free or low cost education, training, and networking opportunities for all of you in the biz app space. As we have our event today, we just ask that everybody be courteous of each other. Again, we are here to educate you. This is not meant to be a sales platform or a recruiting platform, but really for you to increase your knowledge about the core Microsoft Dynamics business and Power Platform applications. In addition to Doug Meetups, which is what you heard join virtually today, we do offer many other programs that you can take advantage of with your free Doug membership. If you're not a member today, check out dynamicsusergroup.com. We have online forums, we offer webinars, we have a robust YouTube channel with about 700 videos, all education topics. And because today's event is being recorded, we will post the recording from today's event on that YouTube channel as well. In addition to the meetups that we host, we do also offer a little bit larger in scale in-person events, which we call regional meetups. We're hosting one today actually in Tampa, Florida, but we do have others coming your way, hopefully soon, one in the Northeast in March, Europe in April, Canada in June. We're going to Africa in July. We'll be in Colorado and Ohio in August and in Texas in September. So we are hoping you're able to join us for one of those. If not, this is an old slide. We don't have virtual anymore, but apparently we're missing our DynamicsCon in-person event slide here. So DynamicsCon in person will be hosted in Chicago, Illinois this year, and it is the week of May 13th, and we would love to see all of you there. I know our programming committee is working very hard right now going through all of the session submissions, and you should see our final agenda posted and publicly available hopefully next week. So it's a little bit about Doug. If any of you have any questions, certainly don't hesitate to ask. And I will pass it back to you, Savannah, to introduce our speaker for today's topic.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yes.
Marcel, can you go ahead and share your screen, please?
There we go.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Liz. That was great. Intro. Welcome everyone to Architect and DevOps, leveraging Power BI and GitHub together. If you don't know, this is a part of a series that Doug Indiana is doing for January called The New Year, New Insights, and it's basically a full month of education revolving around Power BI. This is the second installment in the series. If you're interested in learning about visual calculations, we just had an excellent meetup last week regarding that, and that's posted on the YouTube that Liz mentioned. And then in the coming weeks this month, we'll have sessions revolving around Power BI service, different types of visualizations, and amongst other things. And you can find those on the meetup. Yep, so welcome everyone. Marcel, if you want to go to the next slide. Today we have two speakers. We have myself and Marcel. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Marcel right now. It's funny, our relationship, I would say. He is actually my practice manager, so I report to him directly at the TM group. We are a Microsoft partner who specializes in Business Central. I primarily work on the BI side of things, but I'm slowly dipping my toes into the DevOps world, which is why Marcel and I thought this would be a really fun presentation to give. He has over 30 years of experience doing codey things. And a fun fact that I learned about him was he's been coding since he was 6 years old, which I find incredible because a lot has probably changed in that amount of time. But he is a great community advocate if you're looking for information regarding Business Central development or development in general. So yeah, that's Marcel. I think today we'll have an interesting perspective on how you can utilize Power BI and GitHub together.
And I get the pleasure of introducing Savannah. She's a BI analyst on my team, and saying that I get to manage her is so odd because really my job is just to make sure that she can do the amazing things she does and stay out of her way. She's a leader at the Indiana Doug. She's a Microsoft MVP and has taught me so much already about the community and Business Central, or Power BI and BI analytics. We joke around that she's kind of a big deal, and you should check her out on the online community and her blog. She has so much to offer. It is really a pleasure to work with her.
Thank you. All right, so now we're going to just jump right in. I wanted to start with a quick overview of Power BI and GitHub integration. And I'll kick that off by talking a little bit about what Power BI is. Now, a lot of you here, if you're doing this Power BI extravaganza, maybe you're new to Power BI, maybe you're experienced in Power BI. In case you're not so experienced, I just wanted to quickly touch base on Power BI and its capabilities. So Power BI is a business intelligence application. It allows you to connect to a plethora of different applications, Microsoft owned or not. So it gives you a wide variety of ways that you can extract your data, whether it's directly using a connector or even custom connector to meet your needs. It allows you to analyze your data in a modern way. So you're not just looking at rows and columns of data trying to pick out the outliers. It allows you to dynamically interact with your data, which is something that's really special, and it really allows businesses to move forward and make their data-driven decisions and make data-driven change to enhance their business, process. So in a nutshell, a very, very small nutshell, that is what Power BI is.
I'm going to go ahead and explain a bit about what is GitHub. GitHub is the latest in a long series of popular DevOps platforms. Those of us that have been doing this a long time probably started with something called SourceSafe, and then Team Foundation Server, and then the paradigm shifted to what is a GitHub style. And it is both a thing. GitHub.com is a service that you can sign up for. They have free repository management. We'll talk about what all that means, as well as enterprise tier tools. But GitHub is also the Git methodology is a way to deal with source code and task management, where you can get it from Azure DevOps, for example, has Git style management. So it is both a product and a method, and that's important to keep in mind. So we'll talk about some things that are the method, and other things are only available from certain products. And we're really talking about tools for managing special documents. We're probably all familiar with SharePoint for managing Word documents and Excel documents, but you need special care and feeding when dealing with documents that are code-based products, that there may be multiple files involved, there's interaction between multiple files, there's rules and regulations sometimes around these files and the things you're doing. that need their own special handling tools, as well as workflows and controls around those things. And since you're in there managing all of these source files, these Git products also include a lot of task management tools, which we'll discuss later. And these kind of cross together to try to make the management of a development project or the development operations easier to manage for a team.
Mm-hmm. Really quick too, Marcel. Let's talk a minute about integrating these two products, because I know we're going to dive into this here really soon. We're going to really get into the weeds here, if you will. But when it comes to integrating these two products, I think it's there's some really interesting use cases here that we can explore. And coming from a BI world and kind of crossing over into the DevOps world, sometimes that answer might not be as clear to many people, but from my perspective, I think the biggest advantage to integrating the two would be version control, because that's something that at its inception, Power BI didn't really have.
Mm-hmm. And version control, not just from the document level, but from the individual change level.
Yes.
And a DevOps platform like GitHub will let us group things together. Say your Power BI requires a custom API into Business Central. We can group those together into a single DevOps repository, a group of things, so that your Business Central customizations written in VS Code are kept with the Power BIs that are dependent on them, and they all run tests and validations together to make sure that they're going to function as expected. And then as you do version changes on one, you can check it against the other to make sure you're not breaking things. And that's where the version control really comes in handy, and the ability to scroll backwards through individual changes, what we call the blame chain, to see who changed what when, to ensure that everything's staying up to date and being managed properly.
Yeah. Right, so now let's dive a little bit more into the role of the architect. So we put the role of the architect, and what this really means is the role of the Power BI developer. In this case, that would be myself. That is my primary job. I love creating Power BI reports. And as you go through your journey with Power BI, there's always more to learn. That's something that's really exciting. Marcel mentioned I am an MVP in the Power BI space. That does not mean I know everything about Power BI. I see things every day on LinkedIn about people doing these amazing things, and I'm constantly like, wow, how did you do that? Earlier, or I guess later last year in 2024, I kind of stumbled across the idea of version control in Power BI. And as someone who's kind of been in the channel now for about 5 years, this was something that was really exciting for me to actually put into practice. So when talking about version control in Power BI, there's something that's very important to distinguish right off the bat, and that is the file structure. So typically when you create and save a Power BI project, the ending of the file type is going to be PBIX. So if you save a file, it's always going to have your file name or project name .pbix, and that's how it's saved, and that's how it's typically published to places like the Power BI service. What some people don't know is you can actually change this file type now to what's called a PBIP, and that stands for Power BI project. This is a newer feature that is still in preview, so it is kind of subject to change, but currently it works pretty well. What does a PBIP file structure look like? We'll get into that more in a minute, kind of breaking it down as we go through the demo, but just know that having a PBIP file structure is going to be essential for this GitHub integration to work. We'll talk a little bit later in the demo about how, when, and why to convert a file. But the main why, I think, would be to implement version control in your Power BI project structure. This is especially great if you have multiple people on your Power BI team, possibly working on the same project in different days. You can very easily see, okay, this person did this and they did it when, and you can even add notes or a description as you push things to GitHub, which can give the other developers more context as to why changes were made. But yeah, so what is GitHub, Marcel? Because in a minute here, these viewers are also going to see GitHub Online, GitHub Desktop. What are these tools?
So, as I mentioned earlier, GitHub is the service, and we'll be using github.com for these demos, but know that there is GitLabs and Azure DevOps GitHub, and there are other things that are Gits, and they will have the same nouns and verbs, but their flow and function might be slightly different. I know Azure DevOps does GitHub a little bit differently than github.com, but they're all going to have a very, very similar structure. To move things in and out of the web, to control the commit, we'll talk about all these verbs in detail in a little bit. To do the branching and commits and those activities, you use either the web interface, or you need to use GitHub Desktop or a desktop app for your service to pull the data, we call that a clone, or sync to your desktop so you can work on it. This brings the files local. You can then work on the files. You then need to commit and sync those changes back up to the web, to the cloud. The desktop can facilitate those moves as well. Bring it down, you make your change, you add your commit, you push that back up to the cloud. GitHub can also, these actions can be a part of the development studio you're in. For those of us doing Business Central development, it's a part of Visual Studio Code. I can pull and I can commit right from the integrated development environment, or the IDE. Visual Studio has that built in as well. Many studios, right down to Vim, have it built in to do Git processes together, and that saves you time. So the tools are going to be through the web, through desktop to do the interaction between the web and my local file folder structure. We're not going to see the IDE in action, but that is another place where people will do Git work.
Awesome. So when it comes to Power BI development, I think this is something else that's important to discuss as we talk and kind of get into how to integrate Power BI and GitHub together. It is the project process, and I'll show the two approaches in the next slide in a moment, but essentially this process might not look different from a standard project that you might work on. It's all going to start, with a plan. Typically, whether you're working for your organization or maybe you have clients, it's always going to start with a plan when it comes to Power BI work. Whether your plan may start with having a conversation with the end user that's requesting the report, or maybe it comes in the form as an email. It's important in this step to ask the end user their use case breakdown. What kind of process do they currently follow, and what are the pain points that are associated with that process? What are they looking to gain from this new structure as they dive into Power BI? And what type of ways do they want to visualize data? These are all kinds of questions you might ask as you begin to plan out a Power BI project. And then, once you get your use case or your technical design kind of outlined, then you can begin to create or code to solve the problem. In the case of Power BI, it will always be creation, maybe with a little bit of code mixed in if you create like DAX-oriented functions. And then it will move on to doing a few different things, starting with testing. You're always going to want to test your data source, test the data that's being pulled, and maybe do a little bit of side-by-side comparison before handing it off to your end user. Now, in the next slide, you'll see that there's a few different ways to go about it. We have deploy test and deploy production. Now, depending on the type of project you're working on, you won't always have a test in production, either workspace or environment in which you're pushing to. In the case of Power BI, the thing with service is you could create a test workspace and then a production workspace if you wanted to. Typically, depending on the scale of the project or the report that I'm building, I'll create one workspace and just upload or publish a new version once it has been tested and ready to be released as a production type project where more people could be granted access to the workspace. So depending on your project type, this kind of development process may or may not kind of fold into, but it's basically true for most Power BI projects.
We certainly don't test everything in live.
Right. The good thing with Power BI, though, is you're never going to be writing data. It's always just going to be reading data. So you have less chance for human error or boo-boos related to live data.
And Git has a formal final step to every project, which is called a release. That's where you number it and call it done. In a Power BI process, it's not common to have a formal release, but it does support that, and it packages it together depending on the type of project you're doing, and we call it a final release, which then we iterate the next release off of. And GitHub tends to push towards that formal state. But the nice thing about Git systems is that they're very malleable. And so while you see a release state being a thing, it is not typically a requirement, which is kind of nice.
All right, and here's kind of just a slide that breaks down both of those approaches that we just kind of touched on. So approach one, being the standard Power BI process that I followed for a very long time and sometimes still do, and that would be, you as a content creator or a Power BI developer or whatever your title may be, you're creating a report and you are then publishing that to a Power BI or Fabric workspace. In this case, it shows a test workspace and a production workspace. And like I said, that may be different dependent on, your process and your needs when it comes to Power BI development. Approach two kind of outlines a GitHub integration, and with this, you are going to still create your Power BI file, except you might notice under the content creator box here in approach two, it says PBIP, whereas the standard would be PBIX. So in this step, you are converting your file type to a PBIP, and then you are committing and pushing changes to GitHub, where, changes are kind of logged in a repository, and then you will be able to publish to a Power BI workspace. This has a few extra things here. This is mostly meant to just give an outline of the process, just to give you an idea. Also, I do see a few questions in the chat. Thank you, Liz, for answering. This, once again, will be uploaded to Dynamics User Group's YouTube page. So if you are missing anything or, taking notes, this will all be recorded and published for you there. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to, unmute yourself or ask them in chat as Marcel and I go through this presentation and demo. If you have any questions at the end that maybe didn't get answered, they can be answered on the Meetup page or via LinkedIn if you have any aftermath questions. But anyway, we can go on and go to the role of DevOps now.
Oh, that would be me again. So DevOps, short for development operations, is a whole branch of efforts and work alone. But key to it is tools like GitHub and what used to be SourceSafe and Team Foundation servers that helps the team manage the special care and feeding of these more complicated projects. Source control being a major portion of it, of keeping track of changes, being able to validate those changes, roll back those changes when they're not in line with the goals, to be able to work with the source code, the dibbly bits of software development. DevOps also deals with access management. Who's allowed to work with each piece of code? Who's allowed to access which files? Are they public? Are they private? Which teams are involved? And then what version are we working on? Are we making a release? Are we rolling it to production? Are we iterating through smaller steps? When you look at a piece of software, you'll see that it's got 4 segments to the version number 1.0.0.0. Well, when we're just writing code, just doing little tests on small pieces, that's the last numbers, and that number is usually in the thousands. Then the next one is when we're releasing internally, and then we have minors and majors, the first number being your major release, and controlling that version, knowing what's out, what's available. That's all a part of DevOps and is controlled through releases in the Git systems. Because we've pulled all of our developers into one place to do this work, it only makes sense to also put task management in there. Savannah will show in a bit a Kanban board that is built into GitHub that tracks tasks against releases, against branches, against commits, so that we can watch as tasks are being worked on, their progress and the changes and the related work to them, which then goes into releases. And the last 2 pieces kind of go together. We call it continuous integration or continuous validation, CI. In a CI system, before something can become the main release, before something moves up in the chain, and we'll look at the chain in a second, that's my next slide, it has to be tested. And CI, continuous integration, runs those tests for you automatically. GitHub doesn't have them for Power BI yet. DevOps in Azure DevOps, there are some extensions that will actually run your Power BI for you and send you the results so that you can validate them every time that there's been a change. So if I change a Power BI or a Business Central API, it will run the Power BI dependent on it and let you know that you didn't break them. And this type of cross validation, this continuous integration work, really helps us developers make sure that we're not breaking things in these larger, complex, interconnected projects. Continuous integration also expands to what we call next majors and next minors. For Business Central, every month we check to make sure that code we've written previously will work against the next major release of Business Central. You can get that on the insider track and it automatically runs those tests. You can also make sure that your Power BI isn't going to break on the next major release of Business Central with some of the tools in Azure DevOps. I'm expecting to see them start showing up in github.com as well soon. And these actions, they're called, that do the continuous integration and next major testing, actually can go out. They can spool up virtual machines. They can fire up Azure hosting services. They can do an amazing amount of work and then kick back a result, whether it passed or not. And if you're doing testing against next major, that gives you maybe a month or two before Microsoft releases the thing that broke all your hard work. I'm not saying Microsoft breaks my work all the time, because maybe they do, but it gives us a chance to catch up and identify when these problems are coming and to be able to do fixes and validate when our projects are going to need to be updated. We've kind of danced around the verbs of a Git system. This picture here is a little bit out of date. It used to be that the main branch in your DevOps was called the master branch. It is now called the main branch. That's just, it was, wow. I don't want to say how many years ago that was, makes me feel old, but they switched from master to main. A branch is a copy of the project. All the source code, all the files, everything, they all exist in branches. And you always start with one branch called main. You can, before you start to work on something, before you make any changes, you make a new branch. And that copies everything over to a new named branch. It is exactly the same. It will have all the same actions, all the same CI CD work if you want, but it's a copy that is separate from the one that you have out in production. And then you clone that to your drive and you work and you make all these changes. And every time you make a change, some people do this for every minor change. Some people do it at the end of every day. Some people do it at the end of every feature. You want to make commits, which writes those changes from your local to the branch in the cloud as often as makes sense to be able to undo damage. These are all named. You give them a little name and a reason, and this will say that these are all the changes, and they all stack up in this ordered list of changes that you've made, so that you're able to roll those back, you're able to review the change, you're able to audit what you've done through all these minor commits. Once you're done, everything looks great. We've tested it. We've done our squirrely deploy to make sure that it is good in our test environment, and we're happy with it. We'll then do a pull request, which I think is one of the hardest names for those new to Git. You are asking to pull the changes into main or into another branch. I always think of it as pushing. I want to do a push request, but it's a pull request, and I just have to get used to it. And what this does is this now takes all the commits and gives the controller, the person who is watching these pull requests, a list of all the changes that have happened across all the files and all the commits, where they can now review what the changes are. Typically, in my environment, this is where a CI run goes through to make sure that when it merges, which is the step after the commit, when it's done, is it going to crash? It'll actually do a mini test merge to run your CI to make sure that nothing's going to break when you bring it into the main branch. This is also where you do comments and code reviews. And then if it's all approved, you go merge, and it brings all those changes into the main branch, and it's ready to perform a release. And that's the loop for iterative work on a project. The other thing that happens a lot in Git is there's a project out there, because Git has a lot of public repositories, that you want to grab a hold of and make changes to, but you're never going to send those changes back. It's close to what you want, but not exactly, but you'd love to get a copy of it. You can do something called a fork. This makes your own private copy of the project that you don't necessarily intend to return to the main branch. For example, there's some reports that you like that are for Great Plains, and you wish to convert them to Business Central. Well, you're never going to check those changes back in, but there's an open source set of reports that you want to start from. A fork is a great way to do that. One of the things that a fork does, though, is it puts you in the fork list for that repository. So if I go and I look at that GP repository of reports, I'll see that it got forked to a BC repository of those reports. And if your fork is public, that gives me a way to move through the open source community to different forks that may be further along a project goal that I'm working towards. You can always, in a public Git, download it, upload it to your Git, and not do a formal fork, in which case nobody knows you've done it and there's no connection. But if you're working on an open source project that you're going to make an open source fork of it, it's nice to do a formal fork. That way people can follow that path and be able to join in on the changes and be able to track and gain the benefits that way.
One thing I wanted to mention too, even though today we are reviewing the verbiage that goes and revolves around GitHub, I know it can be a bit overwhelming. So, practice will make perfect as far as this process goes. And even if you're not, completely catching on to what a branch is or commit, clone, if all of these words are kind of getting jumbled up, that is okay. The good thing as far as related to Power BI, integration with GitHub is it's important to know this, but it's also a little bit less complex as if you're working on a project, a little bit more intense, such as with Business Central.
Yeah, and just these are things to know about if your Power BI project is being co-opted with other projects, which is the end goal. Is if you've got some very focused reports, we want all this stuff together. One of the things that we look for in a pull request is a code review, which terrifies a lot of developers because this means we're going to be looking at your code and talking about what you did and why did you do that. And yes, it's to identify issues. We like to identify that the code is complete. We like to make sure that the code is associated with a task and that the code looks like it solves that task that you said that you solved in the code, and to provide educational opportunities. Often it's not, you did this bad, let me educate you on how to do it better. A lot of times with the teams I have the privilege of working with, it is, oh, wow, that's cool. I need to show this to the other people on team. So when you're looking for educational opportunities in a code review, keep in mind that finding good code and sharing it with others is often more valuable than finding less optimized code and educating one person. Sharing really good code brings everybody up, and that's a fantastic thing to look for in your code reviews. So we've talked around task management, and I'm going to hand back the mic as it is to Savannah to talk a bit about GitHub Project.
Yeah, so GitHub Project is something that is admittedly relatively still new to me, but it's very exciting because I'm a very big planner type of person. And when I say planner, I mean Microsoft Planner, physical planners. I just like to have a plan. And I like to be able to log my project details in one cohesive place. And with GitHub Project, that's a really great tool for that because it's a Kanban board type planning system where you can move tasks around depending on what's the word I'm looking for? The stage in which you are completing the task. So maybe you have a bucket for tasks that have not been started, or you're planning, or you're building currently. You can move these tasks that are associated around. So in the case of Power BI, this might be add a slicer to page 1 or create measure X, Y, and Z. These are all kind of things you could add into your project plan. And it basically allows you to stay on task. But the cool thing is you can actually assign tasks to the different branches. And so that way you are preventing user error or forgetting to do a task. It's all connected back to a branch within GitHub, so you can't just say, oh, that task was done until, it's been completed there.
And by assigning it to a branch, your code reviewer on your merge or on your pull request can look, go, did you do all these? It gives you some belts and suspenders.
Yep. All right, and now we'll talk a little bit about collaboration challenges. I just wanted to throw this slide in here because, as a Power BI developer, it's likely that you'll work with a lot of different people. You might work with engineers, you might work with developers, you might work, with C-suite. So specifically in the case of working with developers and managing projects using GitHub, these are some challenges that, you might face. And we'll run through these pretty quickly because I want to have time to show you the demo on how exactly to integrate Power BI and GitHub. But as far as the Power BI world is concerned, is the PBIP process and file structure, if you will, is still in preview. So what that means is this is subject to change. Microsoft has something in preview. It could last a year, it could last 2. And during that time, they're constantly tweaking and making changes based on community feedback. Also, once you get very comfortable utilizing a PBIP file structure, you can implement other things such as Visual Studio Code and other assets that can help alter your code, which, unless you are a more experienced developer, I kind of recommend not doing because it can cause unexpected errors related to your file. So just word of caution there.
And the other challenges are the same stuff that has to do with anytime you're editing files as a group. 2 people make a change to the same file. That can be a little bit of a challenge if the merge isn't able to handle it. Somebody publishes something straight from main, makes an edit to main. That's kind of rude. And then you do a pull request and the person who approves them is on vacation. You kind of get stuck in limbo. So those are some of the collaboration challenges from the DevOps side. And we do want to do a demo, so I'm going to hop right through the obvious communication things. Staying clear with your goals, standardize your workflows. Repositories and version control is nice. Using your tools and your boards and your actions and your projects to clearly communicate with everybody on team. But let's get to the Savannah with her example workflow.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. There we go. Okay, so what we've done here is we have created a Power BI project. So, and I say Power BI project as if that's the wrong verbiage. Don't follow that. I have created a Power BI report in the standard PBIX file structure. If you've gone to my demos before, it's likely you've probably seen this before, this report. But before we dive into like the how, I want to quickly cover a few prerequisites. The first being you'll obviously want to create a GitHub account, and you'll also want to download GitHub for desktop. The GitHub for desktop logo looks like this little purple guy, which I'll expand this in a minute so you can see it a little bit more clearly, but you'll want to do that. And then you'll also want to make sure that the Power BI project feature is enabled. So to turn on this preview feature, you can go ahead and go to File, and then Options and Settings, Options, and then under Preview Features right here, you get all of these features that Microsoft is working on. You'll want to make sure that Power BI projects right here, Power BI project PBIP save option is turned on here. So because mine is already turned on, obviously I'm okay. And like I said, this is in preview, so it's subject to change. So once you have all of those prerequisites completed and you have developed your Power BI report as normal, it's time to save. So rather than just saving this file as a standard PBIX, you're going to want to either save it as a PBIP or convert it to a PBIP. So I've already saved this as a PBIX, but I'm going to go ahead and convert it. So if you go to File and Save As, you have all of these different options down here. I'm going to just change this to PBIP, and I'm going to select a location. So in this case, I have created a new folder called Doug. That's not the one I want. I have created a new folder called Doug Indiana PBIP. I really, really recommend that you create a separate folder for this, because what you're going to see in a minute is once I save this, my file structure up here will change. It now says Power BI project. Once we open this, you'll see that my file structure has been broken into 3 parts. Can I make this any bigger? Sorry, I can't make this any bigger right now, but I hope you can see it well. So it's broken my file structure into 3 parts. You'll see the Power BI report project file. So .report here. This is going to act as your working document. It's going to be the file that you'll choose as you continue your development. So if I open this, you'll see all of the different types of things that are related to aesthetic, if you will. And it will also hold your coded blueprint of how your report is to kind of function. You'll also see the semantic model file folder, and this is going to hold the coded blueprint for your how your semantic model behaves. So just note, that this is the structure that it's broken into, and that is okay. And here is your document that you'll choose to continue work instead of your PBIX. So lots of different little things here. But now I'm going to go ahead and open up GitHub for desktop. As I said, it's a little purple octopus cat thing. You can download this from the Microsoft Store. And what I've done here is I've created a repository, and just to keep, my clients' data a little bit more safe, I'm not going to show how I created the repository, but all I did is hit this down arrow and hit add new. And when it asked for a source, I essentially just linked the folder I made to this. So right now we see that no new changes are made. But there's a few little places I want to kind of point out as far as GitHub Desktop. And Marcel, you kind of touched on these a little bit earlier as far as verbiage. But over here, you'll see changes, and the changes tab will show you all of the changes that have been made once they've been committed to the branch. And then history here will show each change that's made to your project, but in code. So as someone who's not a developer, this history and code doesn't mean a ton to me, but it allows you to kind of dive into what that site looks like. And then lastly is this publish repository button. And this is critical because it's what's going to allow your changes to be viewed in GitHub Online. So this is the important button for Fusion development teams and collaboration. Marcel, did you want to add anything to kind of the UI of GitHub Desktop?
Yeah. Up at the top, you can see that your current branch is
Yes.
main. You could click that little drop down there, and that will let you create a new branch if
Yep.
you wanted to do changes in a different branch, or switch branches if you have different branches doing different feature sets that you're experimenting with. You can have those all in different branches. The great thing in GitHub Desktop is that as you switch branches, it'll swap the files out for you live. And that publish repository button up on the ribbon next to that branch, that'll actually change to a it's either sync or commit. They mean almost the same thing after the repository is published. So once you publish it, you can then commit and then sync and push your data up repeatedly from that point forward. So those buttons are really important because you can make commits, which will then log the changes, but it won't send them up to the repository yet. You have one extra little step in GitHub Desktop. Say, okay, now that I've committed these changes, why don't you upload them?
Speaking of publishing a repository, that's actually what we're going to go and do here. And here you can just enter a name and description. And I'm just going to do a quick test description here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit publish. And you'll notice there's some things happening in the background here. And basically what I just did is I push it to GitHub Online, which I will pull up in a moment.
And you see that name's already changed to fetch. A fetch origin is a synchronize what's in the cloud with what I have locally. So the buttons change in names. And that can be confusing at first, or at second, or forever. It's okay.
All right, and now I am just searching for my repository. Might just take me a moment because I have many repositories.
You can push a button that says view on GitHub, which would take you right to the repository. It's the last button in the button panel.
Oh, thank you, Marcel.
That wasn't there before you pushed the publish button. Don't worry, the buttons change around to do their own thing.
Okay. So here we are. Thank you, Marcel, in GitHub Online. And you see the repository that I made, PBIP trial Doug. And there hasn't really been any changes. So the only thing we've done is the initial commit to the project. But let's say that I wanted to go ahead. I'm going to pull this off this screen here really quickly. And we are going to start to make some changes here. I'm only going to do one change. I'm going to just add a slicer, which should then change the structure of my project. I'm going to make a slicer based on not the job number. Let's do the description. Okay, so now that I've made my change to my report, I'm happy. I'm going to save my PBIP file. Maybe it's saving without my little swirly, but I'm going to go back and go ahead to GitHub Desktop. And unless I made a...
If you click Show and Explorer, we can check that you saved to the folder you thought you did.
Okay.
There was a button on GitHub Desktop, the middle one. Make sure you save into this folder.
Okay, so what I did here is I accidentally made one folder too many. So let's go ahead and resave. That was my bad. And I'm going to go ahead and delete my slicer and I will just re-add a different slicer. There we go. Okay, so make sure you're saving to the right folder. Take a lesson from myself. And as you make changes, you'll notice that now that I've saved it to the correct place, all of these different changes that I've made have now been cataloged, if you will, into the GitHub Desktop. So now that we have all of these different changes, you need to start committing them to main. Some of this probably should have already been done initially, but because I made an error with saving, I have a lot of these different things. But the interesting thing is, as you click through these changes, you can actually see in code, what was made. And this will be true whether it is changes in DAX or changes in appearance. This is also interesting because as you click through, you can see the different assets of your report here too that are uploaded. You can see if things have been deleted or taken away. And as you begin to check and commit things to GitHub Online, you will then be able to see them virtually through the web portal. Also, Marcel, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but once I was doing this, I checked all these boxes and hit commit to main, and it kind of pushed everything under one change. Do you see that frequently?
Yep. So if you say 7, if you check the box at the top and you're gonna do 17 changes, yep. You give it one name, maybe initial development.
Yep.
And then you commit it. Then that will commit all of those under that flag.
Mm-hmm. So if you're making individual changes, I just committed those to main, and now it's time to push, correct, Marcel?
Yep, you can now push.
Yep, so once you commit and then push, it will then show in the online version of GitHub.
And
There
if
we
you go
go.
back and delete that new slicer, we should see a change.
Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and just not click on it, but just delete it and resave it. And now you can see in red, green is good, red is bad, that the slicer has been deleted. I could say slicer deleted and add more notes if I wanted to, but I'm going to go ahead and commit that, push it, and then you can see here all the different steps. There are some boo-boos here with my saving error, but you can see exactly when the slicer was deleted. And if you click into this, you can get more information here. So this is just a really great way. This also works, by the way, if you completely delete your file. So say someone goes in and deletes your PBIP file completely, you can actually go back and revert changes. And pull backwards for version control. And you can also do that within Power BI, not Power BI Desktop, Savannah, GitHub Desktop, reverting changes. So yeah, that is a quick rundown of how to integrate Power BI and GitHub together. There is a lot, to practice, to learn regarding, this. And even myself, someone who's done this a few times, I still make errors when it comes to implementing GitHub and Power BI, but it can be a really powerful tool for version control and, team development, especially. But yeah, thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, we're kind of out of time for questions today. I know everyone has other meetings. If you have questions, feel free to put them in this chat or ask directly on the Meetup page, and we will be happy to answer them. Also, Marcel and I have both written blog posts about Power BI and GitHub together, and we can put those in the chat too. In my blog post, I basically run through directions on how to implement Power BI, integrate them together, Power BI and GitHub. And Marcel's blog post goes a little bit more into the development side of that.
How to watch your GitHub with Power BI, kind of doing it backwards.
Right. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I know we ran a little bit over today. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you guys. I hope to see you in the next one. Our next meetup will be next Monday, January 20th from 1 to 2 o'clock EST, and that is with Belinda Allen, and she will be discussing 10 reasons to move from Power BI Pro or Premium to Fabric. So if you're interested in Fabric, that would be a great session for you to attend. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.